Welcome. We're excited to have you joining us. And today we're going to have a great conversation. My name is David Stallman. I'm co-founder and president of Campus Speak and Evergreen Speakers. And we're excited to have you all here with us. And joining us today, we have Cheyenne Taylor Jacobs. She is an educator and writer whose passions are rooted in dismantling our institutional oppression and writing stories that create space for marginalized communities. Her core belief is that everyone deserves to feel safe. So she works to unpack the limiting and biased views that cause harm. Cheyenne lives in Atlanta, but is proud, born, raised Jersey girl who loves to relax by traveling and eating cookies. And yes, self-care is essential. We also have Dr. Lori Bednarchik, and she is one of the leading experts in sexual consent and communication. And for the past decade, she has worked very closely with college students across the country, challenging their norms surrounding relationships, consent, and sex. Dr. B has a PhD in human communication from Arizona State, a master's in public health, and a BA in English and gender studies from the University of Maryland, amazing school, my alma mater, go Terps. And she was also a Division I athlete there. She lives, works, and plays in Mission Beach in San Diego, California. And when Dr. Bednarchik is not teaching, speaking, or writing, she can be found working out, binge watching predictable teen dramas, and taking long walks on the beach, and also in the never-ending quest for the best happy hour. We are excited to have both of these experts engage in a great conversation about this month and why Domestic Violence Prevention Month is so important. So I'm going to start off asking both of you, as we are in this month, why is it such a good opportunity for us to just step back, to look at relationships in general, and really start to think about how these relationships and the dynamics can be seen from both inside those relationships and as an outsider looking at the relationships of those in our world whom we care about. Dr. Lori, would you start us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, by the way. I'm really excited to be here and having this conversation with you all. And this is certainly a really important month. I'm glad that we can kind of shine a spotlight on relationships, particularly healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. And I just really think that it's important for students and obviously all people to learn and discuss relationships, boundaries, warning signs, because even if it's not happening to you in your own relationship, it's probably happening to somebody around you or will, unfortunately. And when I talk to students, they continuously tell me that they've seen or know of somebody who's in a relationship that just doesn't really quite feel right, and they don't always have the words to describe what they're seeing and don't have that confidence to say something. So I think when we're, shining a spotlight on this and talking about this, it's not just about preventing abuse, it's about understanding what is a healthy relationship,
Mhm.
right? And how do we kind of handle all that messy stuff in the middle, and I think that it really helps us highlight warning signs, right? Things that we can recognize before things escalate. We can give students real tools to help a friend or to set those limits or boundaries in their own relationships. And so I just think it's all about, kind of raising the standard of how we treat each other in our relationships, whether those are romantic friendships or otherwise.
I love that. I think that I personally also love how you illustrated this aspect of just kind of having this pause to say, wow, is this healthy? And I think my addition to that would definitely be that is, in my eyes, the key, right? I think so often we focus on, is this relationship abusive? And I always tell people, yes, and we should be doing that. However, there's so many steps that happen before we get there. And I think this month is so important because it's really about expanding that lens and that nuance, right? I think so many times when I work with students and talk with students, there's this big misconception that, like, if you fall into a relationship that is unhealthy and that really expands the lens of being abusive, it's like, what is the problem with me? Like, how could I let this happen? And me even being myself as someone who has been in relationships like that, it's really easy to think, oh my gosh, like, how could I let this happen? So I think one, kind of creating that space to say, hey, I personally, in my mind, choose to believe that everybody, whether it's an intimate partner, a job, a friend, a family member, will probably come into a relationship where it's like, oh my gosh, I don't think I should be here, right? So, what does it look like to just kind of get away from that taboo topic of you are somehow the problem when this happens if you end up in an unhealthy relationship? And I think then moving to what does all the nuance look like, right? I think so often when I work with students and talk with students, it's this idea of like, well, this was a one off incident and this was a one off incident. But I'm sure, Lori, even in your work, when you have them really take a step back and look, it's like, oh, these might have been one off events, but it was 30 events that were all one off events.
Mhm.
And so I think that is why this month is so important because it really is sometimes taking that pause to say, is this a pattern, right? Is it really just a one-off event, or is this a pattern that maybe because, we don't talk about it enough, you don't realize that, wow, yeah, this person is harming me in that way. And so I think that's why for me, there's never a bad time to talk about this, but I will not, think a month is bad to kind of say like, hey, let's stop and let's pause.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
an opportunity to highlight. And I
We need the
think
opportunity.
yeah,
it just forces us to step back and say, like, all right, lots of things going on. Let's focus a little time and energy on this. And I think the college market is in particular an opportunity. Again, the cycle breaking and excuse me. I'm not sure either of you know this. I know we've talked about topics a lot, but my mother actually was a researcher in domestic violence and did work in this area about 30 years ago. Internationally looked at comparative studies on how intervention tactics were used. And at that time, it was evolving. The subject was evolving, and an understanding of what unhealthy relationships were. It was very different. It was really focused on only physical. And I know that at that time, she was always saying how good it is for college students in particular, this market in particular, to start to learn about warning signs, red flags, green flags, even, but also those orange flags, that messy middle that I know you talk about. And it was interesting to learn from her that perspective of this is a time when so many people, especially on residential campuses, are there and dating intensely in a way that is unlike earlier and unlike oftentimes later than that college life. And
yeah.
so within that context of this particular opportunity for us within our higher education markets, could you speak to kind of that intensity of the relationships and how this is especially an opportunity for those that work in higher ed and our students to be able to be more observant of what's going on around them? Cheyenne, would you speak a little bit just to that sort of that intensity and the opportunity that presents ourselves being in these, especially some of these residential higher education environments?
Yes, I think that is an amazing just question and thought, and very much shout out to your mom because I love learning about folks doing this work even before I was doing this work, right? Because it also shows that this is not just a new thing. It's something we've been doing. And I think when we look at college campuses as a whole, I always like to use the framework of saying anywhere you have a lot of people in a group of people, that's when things are going to happen. Like I like to come with this approach that's just very like realistic. Like let's take the band-aid off. Let's be honest, you have how many thousands of people here, how many groups that are forming, how many organized teams, like there's definitely going to be problems. And I think the biggest reason why it's such a beautiful opportunity, and a lot of times, not just an opportunity to kind of give this education as a preventative way, but also in a post crisis way, because you have people coming from different backgrounds and frameworks. So, personally, even in my conversation that I give, I highlight that about 60% of children actually have experienced and witnessed some form of abuse and violence in their home. And I'm seeing I'm Lori, I'm seeing your head nodding, right? So you got to think if 60% of children have grown up witnessing these things happening, and now we're going to put you in a demographic of people your age, your parameter of what is healthy and what is not is going to be really different, right? And I always like to use this example of maybe for you being yelled at or yelling in a relationship is not a problem if for 18 years all you saw was yelling, right?
Yeah.
And if no one maybe takes that pause to say, actually, not only should we not be yelling in relationships, I am so sorry that you experienced and witnessed that your whole life. Let's have this conversation. And I think also being able to be in a place where you also have student resources is so important. That's why I love being able to be on college campuses where we can partner with different, health offices or victim services offices, because, as I'm sure Lori can testify too, it's kind of like we come in here, we do this hour, we do the 30-minute questions, and I always say, like, I can't fix everyone's problems, right? I'm going to give you this information and then I'm going to go. But who can help you in the long run are these college services. So I really do think being able to understand that, again, one, this is the first time that a lot of people are probably, to your point, leaving their home for this amount of time. You are in relationships, meeting people you've never seen before, and really just kind of understanding that we don't know what type of education or what relationships people have already been through. And again, it's both an opportunity to be preventative, but also a time to really also work post crisis. And I think I really love to kind of hit both of those, because I just think, you know, I feel these conversations need to be happening so much earlier in life. But if I can get them, by the thousands on a college campus to say, you know what, I'm going to plant the seed so that, again, you should never have been yelled at, even at your home. I think that's a beautiful thing that we can do for students.
I it's so interesting because I wasn't like thinking of like the past trauma. I don't usually take that approach often, but it made me think of in particular an example that I had with a student where I teach a conflict and communication class.
Oh,
And so we talk about conflict styles, and obviously we learn our conflict style from our primary caregivers, whoever it was that we were seeing, have conflict in the home. And I had my students write down, like, what is your definition of conflict? How do you engage in conflict? Those types of things. And then they shared with each other. And then I opened it up for conversation. And this one guy raises his hand. He goes, so I just learned that throwing things at each other during a conflict is not normal.
hmm.
He was like, that was just what my parents
You
did,
learn.
and I'm talking to this person here who made a face when I said that, and to him, that was just completely normal. And so I love that you're pointing out that we don't even necessarily know that some of the things that we are doing that the other person's interpreting as
Mhm.
being unhealthy. Our intention isn't to harm
Right.
necessarily. That's just our conflict style. And so learning that we need to negotiate that in relationships and how we speak, how we communicate, how we engage in disagreements, all of those things are so important. And
Hmm.
like you said, it's about talking about those things where it's like almost it's so central, but it's also periphery. Where if I go in and I'm talking about conflict, a lot of times schools will be like, "Is this about relationships?" And you're like, "You best bet it
You're
is."
like, hold on.
Like that's the whole core. But just because I'm not saying relationships, it's like when we sit on these peripheral things and we say these are core skills that need to be developed before we can even have a healthy relationship.
Hmm.
So we need to be kind of stepping back and saying, okay, what can we be talking about, pointing out, teaching that's going to get people where we want them to be, not just that awareness piece or the knowledge piece about what an unhealthy relationship is, but what are the things that are characterizing it and how do we make those small adjustments and changes in the hour that we have.
In
And
the hour.
I like
Yeah.
that you talk about resources too, because
Wow.
I really try when I'm talking to the schools before I come in to ask them what resources they have,
Mhm.
so that I can incorporate those into the program. Inviting their Title IX or counselor to do, the intro and maybe like a 5-minute spiel of a slide,
Yep.
encouraging the students to take a picture of that. Like, how can I make sure that somehow I'm also helping them get that information out to their students? Because I know that's what they're going to need after I speak.
Yeah.
I love it.
Now, both of you brought it out, and I'm going to use different language, but there's a baseline of expectations and understanding that we all walk in to. And it's almost like what's spicy? What one person might think is spicy based on what they grew up eating could be very, very different than someone else. And they just don't know that difference because the descriptors that we have are so centered around us and our experiences. That these conversations that you're able to have can bridge understanding. So my description of spicy, and it's the same, and Laura, you were talking about just the communication styles. Like I
Yeah,
think, we all communicate differently, and whether it's language and tone and the style, and there's just different baselines for all of us. I think if I tied Lori's hands down, she would be mute. Like there are just different styles that we all have in the way that we do things, and you going to a campus to be able to help them have a common understanding is huge because
yeah,
they're all walking in without that common understanding. And so I want to move towards some of those things. In your keynote, is it healthy or harmful? You talk about orange flags and green flags in particular. I wanted to pull that out and have you explain again, this is some of that commonality. Like this helps people to identify in reflection of their own relationships,
yeah,
intimate or other, but also in those that they care about or even just may have influence over in
yeah.
terms of the ability to help that perspective. So can you talk a little bit about orange flags and green flags, how we can understand them, and how we might even be able to give tips on communicating these in a way that you're giving people tools so
Yeah.
they can use these frameworks?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've had in, my educational career, my professional career, and really, working really hard on these programs. And I've certainly made changes over time with feedback and talking to students. And similar to, I also speak on consent. I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I remember when I finally made the shift from no, right? And everybody's like, is this a no? Is this a no? Is this a no? Is this a no? And similar to what you were saying about spicy foods, right? Like, is this spicy? Is this spicy? Is this spicy? And I was like, you know what? Like I can't do this anymore because I don't have the answer. But what I do have the answer to is what a yes clearly looks and sounds like. So I can teach you what a yes clearly looks and sounds like. And then anything other than that, even if you're not sure if they think or you think, that's a check-in, that's a possible no. And I was like, teetering on that with like the relationship violence piece because I was going in and I'm talking about here's what relationship abuse is, here's what these red flags are. And what I'm starting to see with students is that they're starting to do this thing where they're like, how big is my red flag? Because my red flag compared to that red flag isn't all that big. And instead of a continuum of green flags, orange flags, and red flags, they're looking at, well, this is a little red flag, this is a big red flag. Those people have a really bad relationship, but mine's not that bad, right? And so they're
Wow.
putting up with things that and we see it all the time on the media, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I love dating reality television and Love Island, The Ultimatum,
Love is
Too Hot
blind.
to Handle, Love is Blind that just started, right? We love drama. We love, the thing that like gets me with students right now is they're like, I want my partner to be obsessed with me. I'm like, that the fact that we've normalized obsession and drama
Mm.
and all of these things, in reality, healthy relationships are kind of boring in like the best way possible. But they're not like the TikTok accounts where we're ranking our red flags and, posting every argument that we have with one another. And that's the model that a lot of students are getting for relationships. And so I kind of moved towards this idea of like, let's talk about healthy, like green, 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 like the absolute ideal of idealist relationships that we can all strive to be in. Because if it's not quite that, we either need to have a conversation or we need to think about, is this the right person for us? Is this the right relationship for us? And so I think back to your point of like the orange flags, I think most of us sit in an orange space. I think students are very clear on red flags. Um, it's the stuff where it's like, well, this only happened once, or like Shannon was saying, it's like, well, did it just happen once or did it happen more than once? I think that a lot of students are reluctant to say something the first time something happens because it's really easy to pass that off. So if our partner maybe makes a comment on our outfit or maybe gets angry because we are spending more time with our friends than with them, or any of those types of things, we might step back and go, well, that's not really that big of a deal. And the action itself isn't, but the underlying behavior of power and manipulation and anger and control and jealousy that we're feeling from that little thing is what we need to address. And we need to address it as soon as it happens and have this space to create those conversations early and often during the relationship so that we're not waiting until it's happened 30 times and that we find ourselves unable to speak up or to get out of that relationship if needed.
If
Before
I
I
said, oh,
oh no, go ahead, Cheyenne.
sorry, I was gonna say I love everything. I would love to be in the audience actually. No, because I really love two parts. One, I remember my introduction into this work was in college and I did a huge presentation. I always did like a tabling of media representation and sexual violence, domestic violence, right? And when you said like it's almost this, oh, my partner has to be obsessed with me. One thing I always say in one of my keynotes is we all learned very early on because I was that, same thing, reality TV shows before getting on the bus to school. You're watching, you're listening to the radio shows, and I just kind of recognize you should be toxic in your relationship because that means someone really likes you. Like
Passion. It's
the
passion.
passion, like even and regardless of who you are, I remember watching shows where someone would be like, yeah, they just took the food I was eating and flipped it and it hit the wall, but it's like, they're a little crazy and that means they love me. And to your point, when you really zero in on what that says, it's like pause. Like you just want someone to take your breakfast and flip it. So I love that you highlighted that point because I think going back to, mentioning our upbringing, from seeing maybe our parents or folks in our household or different family members, I think also what you consume. If you've been consuming this like idea that being toxic, being violent is a sign, like you said, of that passion, being obsessive means someone cares. One, why wouldn't you be waiting for that? Why wouldn't you be searching for it? And something I wrote down when you were saying this living in the orange, and you gave me this illustration of people just collecting small flags and holding them, and they're like 50 pounds. They're like,
Yeah.
no, 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 but I promise I'm okay.
Yeah.
And I thought about this phrase I heard from someone that says, people oftentimes live in a tolerable state of permanent unhappiness.
Ooh.
Ooh, deep, right? And right, right.
Oh, I
This is
borrow that one.
right. It happened here. We're creating. Listen, there's gonna be like a dual talk with me and
I
Lori
hope
West because
so.
you know what I'm saying? And it's like that's what you just illustrated of like really the image I have is just collecting these orange and red flags and just like no, I'm fine. And it's like you're just in a permanent state of like it's not too much for you to leave, but you're not green enough to be happy, but you're just coasting. And I think that illustration is so important because
Yeah.
I do think so many people are just coasting and they have no idea like we can put the flags down. There I like to tell like there are other options. So thank you so much for it because I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go to the keynote now.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
Well,
You're
No
perfect.
welcome.
And
pressure.
I want to pull two things. I want to with Dr. Lori, a couple things. Green flags they should be looking for. We want some tangible, these are some moving toward, not just moving away, right? Moving
Yeah.
toward things. So identifying what are some of those right off the top of your mind, the green flags they should be looking for before I start to pick up more of the conversation with Cheyenne.
Yeah. I did see you were gonna ask this, and I was like, I'm so glad that I knew you were gonna ask this beforehand because this is such a hard question because there's so many that matter and they all kind of like build on each other in a way. Um, but as I was thinking about this last night before I went to bed, I was thinking, what are the two, or like if I had to narrow it down, what would it be? And the ones that I really highlight during my program is shared values and respect for privacy and boundaries and independence, I should say. And so when I talk about shared values with students, it's this idea that we should be aligned on the things that really anchor a relationship,
Mhm.
right? We hear this idea of, opposites attract all the time. And sure, there are definitely differences in relationships that can be really exciting, and we love to learn from other people and pick up new hobbies and things like that. But when it comes down to the things that are like at our core of who we are, right? Our faith, our goals, our priorities, right? We want somebody who shares those things. So if it's our education, if it's our family, if it's our independence that are core and non-negotiable parts of who we are and our identity, it's going to be really tough to sustain a relationship with somebody who doesn't also value those things. And
Mhm.
so these shared values don't necessarily mean that like we are overlapping, we are the same person. It just means that we're headed in the same direction. And I know it took me a really long time to learn that. And then the other one that I emphasize is that respect for privacy and independence. Um, we live in a world and a culture that kind of confuses closeness with like constant access to one another.
Yeah.
So, sharing all of our passwords, tracking locations, checking messages, having read receipts on, right? But having privacy doesn't mean that that is secrecy, right? We all deserve to have parts of our life that belong just to us. And so it doesn't mean that we're necessarily hiding something. It just means that we are a whole person, that we're not somebody's property and we're not just this couple. That's not our only identity. And so, a partner respecting our privacy, what we're really saying, or what I'm really saying when I'm encouraging that, is that they trust you enough to give you that space. And so, the other ones that I just want to bring up really, really quickly, you can be your real self around this person. You feel appreciated and valued by this person, and you can have alone time without feeling guilty. I know those are really small, but that makes a relationship feel really safe. And those are the ones that when I bring them up, students kind of have these looks on their faces and they're like, "Oh, I didn't
Oh,
think about that." And you're like, it sounds simple, harder in practice. But again, if we have those in the forefront of our mind and that's what we're looking for, then we're going to focus on how do I do that with my partner so that they reciprocate that. And I'm not just, again, sitting in this messy space or this unhealthy space, that I'm also making the effort to do that for my partner, and then they're doing that in return.
I I know it sounds so easy. Just, oh,
Sounds
there's a
so
green
easy,
flag. I'm gonna
doesn't
run
it?
toward it.
Doesn't
There
it?
it is,
And with that,
running right toward it.
and with that
But
being said, I just want to just pause for a moment and say that I am the first in front of a crowd to be like, I might be telling you all of this and having this conversation with you, but that does not mean that this is not a lifelong journey for me
yeah,
myself. Like, I might study this for a living and talk about it for a living and, marinate in it on a daily basis, but that doesn't mean that I myself am perfect or good at it or
exactly.
always engaging in it. So it's definitely something that I think students knowing that it's okay to mess up and it's okay to check ourselves is also okay because they're not expected to be perfect. I mean, they're just
and I think
little
I see
people.
a theme of that respect for your partner's autonomy,
Yeah.
that they are
Oh,
a person, an autonomous themselves, not an appendage, nor are you.
yeah.
And that respect flows through a lot of these green flags you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, Cheyenne, all right. I know you work a lot in that describing that power and control wheel and helping people understand red flags through that lens and being able to identify and see it. So if you could frame it and then also show some specifics that people will be able to grab hold of and put in their mind to look out for. I know this is an area that you're great at explaining.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a really nice compliment. So I would say one of the reasons I love implementing the visual of a red flag is, or the power and control wheel with red flags, is I always kind of ask, students like, we give me the definition and it's always something like a warning sign, stop doing this. And it's like, okay, like, well, then give me your examples of red flags. And I think we all set it at a different space where a lot of times when people think about unhealthy relationships, and or abuse, they think about the physical and sexual violence, which is that outer side of the wheel. And one of the reasons why it's so important for me to show it is because to illustrate that there's so much that happens before we get to that outside of that wheel. Like a lot of times I don't think what students realize until I show them and connect the dots that you said words like someone that belittles you, somebody that Lori, I think you were great by saying like that doesn't give you privacy. I've heard people say things like someone that doesn't have the same values as you as far as like what community means or what family means, right? Someone that makes you feel small, somebody that just doesn't like all of these things, right? And then I help them kind of see like we never even physically put our hands on somebody. And then like I again, not I love because I don't think love is the word, but I do kind of have this moment of like, yes, when you see the eyes and like the light bulb click of like, oh, wait a minute, right? And it's like, so all of those things are red flags. And the way I like to describe them is I like to say it's like a drip of water, right? It's kind of like a drip of water in a bucket. One at a time, it's like, okay, we could just wipe that off with a piece of paper towel. But if somebody's telling you you can't wear this, if somebody's always looking through your phone, if somebody's belittling you, if you start to realize that you're like, I think I have to withdraw from my friends, I don't feel comfortable in what I'm wearing anymore. Well, now that bucket is a little bit overflowed, right? It's overflowing and now we have a problem. And really just kind of giving this visual of what does it look like to not wait to get to the outside of the circle? And even the visual of the power and control wheel, I personally love that that ring outside is smaller than the wheel itself. Because once we get up here, again, that is like I tell people, that is crisis. Like in my, like, that is where I think all of us know once we get up to that ring, you are in complete crisis. But what does it look like to see if I'm in this state of, I would like to say, every day you're chipping away of yourself? That is a crisis, right? And the example I like to give kind of separate to, and I think Laura, I love the way that you said, like, let's talk about conflict, and people are like, what does that mean? I like to use an example of like me and my physical health where I got hurt and I didn't go to the doctor, right? And it's like by the time I went, now we need MRIs, you need doctors, you need this, you need that. Versus what would have happened if we would have said when you first had that little tumble and fall, I think you need to see somebody then.
Yeah.
And I think what's so important when, just to put a bow on it, when it comes to looking at the power and control wheel and it comes to really understanding that there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of levels before we get to what we all know to be the crisis, right? I like to say that we sometimes get so normalized to pain, we forget that we weren't supposed to hurt. And what does it look like to I'm a poet. Also, I'm also a poet.
Please. Yeah.
That's my line. And I love the face of like, oh, I'm like, no, like we sometimes get so normalized to being in pain. We really forget we weren't supposed to be hurting. There
Yeah.
was a time that you could not have imagined not hanging out with your friends and family. And then one day you might end up in a relationship where it's like, oh, I don't see these people anymore. And you really forget that it's like, that's not your value is community, right? And so for me showing that, and I literally am like, take a picture, write these things down, please connect this, save it, look at it, because you're naming them. But I do think, and I lied, I said I was going to put a bone in it. The last thing I'll say is this. I think with students, and I love the language, Lori, of like it's a lifelong journey because even I've had struggle with sometimes using the A word to be like abuse, abusive tendency. This person was abusive. This relationship is unhealthy. And I think with students, sometimes it is, I would say, again, going into this self-judgment of saying, wow, maybe this person I'm dealing with is harming me, right? So being able to kind of say these things and look at it and kind of have that connection, it's kind of that light bulb to say, you may be dealing with, at minimum, an unhealthy relationship with values that are not aligning, going back to someone in their house throwing things is what they did at maximum. And what I want to make sure no one deals with, you might be dealing with someone with abusive tendencies and or an abuser,
Yeah.
right? And you're not the problem for having that happen to you. But I want to make sure we recognize that all of the things in this wheel, you are allowed to say, I deserve more than this. So
Yeah.
for me, it's really connecting what they already know, because they always already know what the red flags are. It's the visual of saying, you're not, thinking that you're being dramatic, essentially. Now there's your
Yeah.
boat stolen.
And I think, well, I want to come right back to you because it's in some ways you're there empowering that little voice in the back of their head
Mm-hmm.
that's
Love that.
reflecting on things, right? And that's kind of still small voice that's saying, wait, this isn't my fault. And this
Mhm.
is something I should examine. And I deserve more than this, or I should have something better like that. You're empowering that voice. So what do they do? So I want to pull from you, Cheyenne, a strategy, a tip, something to be able to allow them to amplify that voice and then act on it? When they hear it, what can they do? What should they do? What do you recommend?
So one of the first steps I love to do is actually have like a moment of a body scan, which sidebar, as people, I don't think we take enough time with ourselves as a as a whole. Example I give is how many of us, especially in college, right? You have classes, you might be on sports teams. A lot of times people coming to, different talks, or even the students that are arranging, your student leaders, you've probably been like devastatingly hungry and just worked through that, right? So kind of already kind of showing that we're not really listening to our body cues in like a bio way. So you're probably not listening to your body cues when, even for myself, navigating a very unhealthy and harmful relationship, where every time this person left, I was getting physically sick. I was crying. I was withdrawing, right? That is the cue that says there's a problem here. It's the cue that when the person calls your phone and you go, and you don't want to answer, right? So one of the first steps I say is, what does it look like to pause and look at that? When my best friends call, I'm like, why are you asleep? I need to talk to you now. Like, first ring, I'm picking up. But when some other friends or some other people in my life called, I'm like, oh, maybe there's a problem there. And again, at minimum, it's something that we might need to communicate with. At maximum, this person shouldn't be in your life. So really taking that pause, that body scan, seeing how you feel with this person. And then the second thing for me is recognizing and aligning, like, if we're engaging in this relationship, and again, I like to work from a lens that does not judge anyone for how they're engaging in relationships, because so many of these things are taught before we even rationalize what's happening, right? I think it's by the age of 5, you already learned how to respond to things, right? So I like to look from this lens of, if you're still maybe friends with this person, that every time they call, again, you go like this, we've all been friends with that person. Why are we in this friendship? Most people will go, I know I shouldn't be there. No, 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 no. Why do you like being friends with them? Well, when I'm with them, it's so much fun and we do this and do that. Okay, great. Can you get that enjoyment in other subsets of life that do not harm you? And a lot of times we look at the lens, and Lori, I think Lori also kind of illustrated this, where we solely look at the red and we forget about these other levels. And if we're only looking at, well, they're giving me a lot of red, sometimes you don't know how to leave the red. What if we look at maybe those 1 or 2 moments where you are having a great time? And what does it look like to find that great time in a healthier setting? And a lot of times when we frame it like that, and I work with students that way, they do realize, you know what, I'm looking maybe to feel, and when I talk about intimate partnership, I use the word like, maybe you want to feel desired, maybe you want to feel beautiful. And they realize, when I'm with this person, I do feel that and we're healthy. What does it look like maybe to exist in that space and build on that space? So again, the body scan, really understanding, what am I feeling? And if we start to have these body cues that are going, my head hurts, I'm sighing, I don't want to pick up the phone, there's a problem. We at minimum have to look at it. And then second from that, why are we here? And not only the red in the bad way, why do you enjoy this relationship? Because again, I'm not judging. There's something from this that you're getting. Could we get it somewhere else? And again, I only got an hour, so I can't answer that question for them. But I have them write that part down. And really, that's when we can expand to look at, I like to look at relationships as like your solar system, right? There's different levels of different people on there. On your solar system, where can we put these attributes and values? And once we maybe find a comfortable spot for them, I've noticed not only in my work with students and my work outside, working with the victims and survivors of domestic violence post-crisis, a lot of times you start to see that separation, right? Because, as I'm sure you know also, Lori, a lot of times, even when folks leave abusive relationships, they go back about 7 times. Like, it's
Yep.
not a one and done thing. I don't expect you to try this once and then you're done with the person. But I do think over time, when you start to have your values really being honored elsewhere, you will start to see, I don't need to exist in this spot.
Before I go to Lori with another question, one, I now know why I get your voicemail so much. I'm just saying. Um, but in seriousness,
I just got that. It took me a
it was a
second.
slow burn.
Right? He loves
In,
that. He
in
loves
in
doing that.
seriousness, there may be someone watching this who feels truly unsafe.
Hmm.
What do they do right now? What are you telling them that they need to do? What are their steps, their first steps?
So if someone is feeling truly unsafe, I'm going to look from two frameworks. One for someone that maybe is not in a position to have the resources, like having a licensed professional to guide them through, and someone who does. So if you're someone who has the access, like if you're on campus, for example, and you have access to licensed professionals, to on-campus victims services, I would go there. I would go there because I'll be the first one to acknowledge these issues and these relationships are sometimes so heavy for us solely to deal with. And sometimes you need someone not to walk in front of you, but to be beside you to really say, what are you looking for? What does out look like? And I think the biggest thing, even when I try to empower people to be the aid or the help for someone that they love, it's not about trying to immediately pull them out because I'm always thinking about their safety. Like you said, some people are in such violent situations that them abruptly leaving could really physically harm them, right? So if you're able to have the access for that, that's one. Two, if you're not, there are victim hotlines that you can call who are able to provide shelter programs, who are able to provide plans. I would also make a safety plan, right? And for those of you watching, definitely if you Google what a safety plan is, it's a document that kind of says, what are maybe the documents you need to take with you if you actually, like, if you have to physically leave a space? Who are the contacts that you should keep in mind? And I think always in the work that I do, as someone that is not a licensed professional in that way, I will always tell people having someone that is licensed who can give you that critical, like right now help is so important. But essentially, since we really are talking to that college age demographic, even folks who are, you know, administrators and faculty on campus, using those resources can do a lot. But again, just to reiterate, if you have the support, being able to talk to that trusted licensed professional or even someone trusted as a whole and just really making sure you have a safety plan, you have your contacts, and don't just try if you're aiding and helping someone to pull them out of the situation. It really could harm them more than help them. Like sometimes these situations take a little bit more, and I see Lori nodding. Like sometimes they take a little bit of planning, which is it's sad to kind of think about it that way. But I always look at people's, you know, safety in the moment. Pulling someone out could really harm them.
Yeah. Well,
So,
that's how I want to transition and wrap this up with Lori. And, I wanted to ask Cheyenne if someone is in that relationship. But for you, Lori, I want to ask you what advice you would give to the person who is beside their friend, their colleague, their coworker. Domestic violence isn't something that is correlated to income and such that, we could say, oh, someone who is in a more financially stable position wouldn't be dealing with this. That's not the case. So if you could, what are the things someone who needs to help is aside, is just there? What should they be doing? What are the resources they should be accessing? And how would you suggest they come up with a strategy and implement a strategy to support someone they know is in a situation where they need help?
Yeah. So I'm glad that you asked Cheyenne about what you would tell the person to do, because I that is a really tough thing for me to advise on, because I'm like, oh gosh, like it all just depends. And so I'm glad that I get to talk about the friend, because as soon as you asked her that and she started talking, I was like, I would say that the number one thing that helps people in the situation who are carrying all of those red flags is to have a friend
mhm,
who is obviously seeing this, because that's the number one question, especially from sororities, that I get is like, can you come in and tell us how we talk to our friends about this
yeah,
because we know it's happening? And like I actually go through a model in my program, this 5I model of how to have that conversation. The conversation has to start with, I care about you. This is coming from a place where you are my friend, you are somebody that I, value, that I care about, not a, how do you not see this? Why are you not getting out of this? This person's a jerk. Why don't you see it?
mhm,
Right? And that's what we want to say, because that's what we're thinking. And it's okay to think that, but when we approach that other person, we need to come from a place of caring. And I think one of the most important things we can do, and this was something that when I was in this situation myself, when I had somebody come to me and very specifically describe what they saw. So, I
mhm,
care about you. Here is what I saw. I saw last night at the party that they grabbed you really hard and yelled at you. it made me feel scared and uncomfortable. And I want to know how you feel about that and give them space to talk about that, right? I'm wondering how you're feeling. And a lot of times when you bring that up, they're going to pass it off. People aren't ready
Mhm.
to hear it in that moment because you've had time to think about what you want to say. They are taking this in for the first time. So ending that conversation with, I will check in with you next week. I will be here no matter what to talk to you about this, and giving yourself space to revisit it with them when they are ready, or when they're ready, they can come to you. And when I had somebody come to me and say, "Hey, Lori, I saw this thing happen," and it was like such a mundane thing that I was like, what's the big deal? But hearing somebody else describe it, that it was meaningful enough for them to notice it, to bring it up to me and tell me it made them uncomfortable, it took a while, but I stepped back and went, wow. And I started noticing other things. And I started realizing, okay, I'm not the only one that thinks this mundane thing is uncomfortable. Other people are seeing it too. So I would say, like, being a friend and you're noticing these things, I care about you. Here's what I saw, and here's how it made me feel, and I'm going to be here and I'm going to help you through this however you want. I think when it comes to resources, or more serious situations that people need to get out of quickly or are unsafe, I think making sure that students understand the resources and how those resources work on campus. Because if a student wants to anonymously talk to somebody, or confidentially, I should say, talk to somebody about this, there are only certain people on your campus who are able to be confidential people, and that is usually your counseling and psychological services, if there is one on campus. If you want to report because you need resources, like you need your classes changed, you need to be moved out of your dorm, you need, some sort of safety measure on campus, your Title IX office is the place to go for those resources. I think a lot of times people think of Title IX as, I'm reporting so I can get somebody in trouble, or I want to report this so that it goes into an investigation. And sometimes that is the case, but that's not the only thing that your Title IX office does. Is they're here for you, and you get to choose, do I want to move forward with a formal report and move this forward, or do I just need these resources from my school in order to make me feel safe? I always tell students, telling a trusted adult is the number one thing that you can do. A lot of students, because they know what I do outside of teaching, um, will disclose to me. Before they do that, I always let them know I'm not a confidential informant. Your professors and other people on campus, all that means is that we have a responsibility to link you with Title IX and to let Title IX know that this has happened to you. You get to decide moving forward what you want to do with that, but I'm not somebody that you can just tell this to and it doesn't go anywhere. So that's why I really like when I team with Title IX offices, and they get a chance to explain some of that process before I go on, because I do think that students have a misconception of the Title IX process. When I talk to students, they're fearful of going to Title IX because they're like, I don't want to get somebody in trouble. There's all kinds of reasons why people are reluctant to do that. But I always let people know, your Title IX people, they're doing that because they care about you. That's a tough, really heavy job. And the people who are in that are because they are knowledgeable and they care, and they're there for you, and not as a judicial getting people in trouble space, though that's something that they can do as well. So I think the friend piece and then the resource piece. I tell students too, I go, if you have a friend that you think needs help, tell them that you'll walk over to counseling services with them. I've done that with a student. Hey, you know what? I'm not a confidential informant, but if you want to talk to somebody, I'll walk over right now. I've been like 45 minutes late for class because I've walked somebody over to counseling and psychological services and sat there and waited because they needed that initial support to get them in. Oh, I'll go later. I'll go tomorrow. I'll go next week. You might not be feeling the way that you are right now
Right. Mhm.
tomorrow. or next week or even in an hour because we're going to do this right now because this is when you're feeling it. So also just as a friend, making sure that you are with them all along the way. You don't need to be an expert. I think students are afraid to say something to their friend because they're like, I don't know what to say. All you need to say is, I care about you and I think something's going on. What do we do? What do
Yeah.
you want to do? Ask your friend, what do they want
Mhm.
to do? What do they need? Because even asking them what they need makes them step back and say, what do I need? And then that makes it really easy. If they're like, I need to talk to somebody, great. I can help you do that. So you don't always need to know the answer. You can always just say, I see it. I'm here for you. I love you.
Yeah.
What can we do?
I love that. I love that. I care about you. I saw this. I feel this because of it, and
Mhm.
I want to know from you how I feel, and I'm going to be here. I love that. Because they can't argue with. They can say what they saw, what you saw was different, but this is what I saw. This is what I
Yep.
experienced. This is how I feel about it. But when you start from a place of caring, then it may give them whichever time that conversation has to happen, the first, second, third, fifth, or whatever, give
Yeah.
them the opportunity to accept help or a new way of thinking about it in a way that's going to put them in a better situation than they are.
And you're never going to be mad at a friend that comes to you and says, I care about you and I want to talk to you about something. Like if
Right.
I had a friend that came to me and said, I care about you and I have something really important to talk to you about, I would be like, right now, what's going on? Do you have something? Do I have something? What's going on? Because that's important, right? So your friend is never, they might not agree with you. They might not see it how you see it, but they're not
Mhm.
going to be mad at you for caring.
Right.
Especially when
And
you don't do it with judgment, but
Yep.
right,
care.
and I think it's also I like to use the idea of just like sometimes it's keeping the door open and just planting the seed
Yep.
because to your point, if you're like, hey, they grabbed your arm, I felt this way, how are you? Of course, like you said, it might just be like it's nothing. But just you seeing that, it does create that door open to know, hey, this person's watching. And something as you were talking, I thought of, that's why one of the first and biggest tactics that's used when we talk about, violent relationships and, this month is isolation. Right? That's like one I don't think there's any clear order of how these things happen, but if I had to, throw my hat in the ring to give one of the first things that happens, it's isolation. Because if I could take you away from the people that care about you, if I could take you away from the people that know you, like even I like to joke, like when people like, what do you mean no? I'm like, I have friends where we talk maybe once a month. I have friends where we talk just about every day, meaning you have 72 hours of not contacting me before I say, hey, what happened, what's wrong, so and that's why it's so important sometimes to your point to have that friend and trusted individual. And I would even say like when you notice that this person is maybe slipping back, just to your point, also being mindful and just saying, I'm noticing, here's a door. Because even in my experiences, I've had sometimes those friends feel bad when they did that and they said it didn't work. And what I always say is we can't rush what is happening. Like you can't make this person just decide one day, to your point, today is a day I'm going to report. Today is a day I'm going to leave. Today, sometimes it really is just being like, I'm here.
Yep.
I'm here from you. I'm listening. I'm checking in. Even if you're not answering, I am here. And sometimes that's all you really can be. So I really love that you highlighted the friend piece. And especially since that isolation is like one of the top and biggest tactics. Because if I can take you away from the people who care about you, I
But
can do
people,
so much because who's watching?
Well, and I just want
yeah,
to point out really quickly too, something came to mind while you were talking, because I know sometimes, like when women are talking about this, the assumption is that we're talking to women. This happens to
Oh
men
yeah. Yeah.
so much. I
Mhm.
got into this field because I wanted to work with men specifically and have conversations with them about this. And I just recently had somebody come up after my program. And it was a guy, and he goes, I just want to let you know that I had an epiphany. He's like, I was visiting my family, and my girlfriend was really mad that I was spending time with my family because, she wanted me to spend time with her. And I felt really bad and guilty for choosing my family over her. But after listening to you, I realized like that was not okay. And so this is happening, and I think a lot of men, try to toughen up, or I need to listen to her or him or whoever it is that they're
No.
dating. They a lot of times are like, this is a conversation that women are having, but this is happening to men. And I just want to make sure that we're including them in the conversation, because I think a lot of times, and I do speak to men specifically sometimes in my programs, where I'm like, guess what? If that female, let's say that you are in a heterosexual relationship and that female pushes you, slaps you, I'm like, it might not hurt,
The
but that's
problem.
violence. Like,
Violence.
that's not okay. And women in the room, just because you're not hurting somebody doesn't mean you can put hands on them. And so
Right.
I think a lot of times too, we need to really be specific talking to the different groups, because, and I think, sex segregated education can sometimes be important, especially when they can come back together and have a conversation about it together after they speak. But I think that it looks different slightly when women are doing it, or men are doing it, even in same-sex friendships,
Mhm.
right? The abuse that women will perpetrate towards their friends is can sometimes be very different than the violence that men perpetrate towards their friends. So,
Mm.
Yeah.
kind of pointing out those nuances, I think, are important.
I love that. And I think I also love the highlighting of, not only to your point that men are definitely victims. I've also had scenarios where folks have came up and been like, I had no idea that this is what I was dealing with. I remember, just someone in my passing, when I was volunteering and different things, they would talk about how the person would do the whole calling, saying the angry message, then blocking them. Then the cycle would just start, which is basically putting them in mental turmoil. And they were like, I just thought I had to continue, and a lot of times feeling like I can't react because I'm the guy and I'm the man, so I just have to deal with it. And also, as you were talking, I thought about one thing I love. In one of the keynotes I do is, asking like, well, when we think about green flags, what do we see? And I actually love seeing the guys in the room be like, I'll never forget, one said, being celebrated. And I was like, that is nice, isn't it? And you start to even sometimes see, and when they students come up to me, they're like, it feels weird to acknowledge, like, sometimes I want to feel like I'm being celebrated, or I want to feel like I'm listened to. I'm like, of course, because you're human. Like, what human wouldn't want to be in a room where someone is pouring that kindness and celebration onto them? So I think that's so important to your point on, one, understanding the violence and abuse that can happen, and also understanding like the same green flags that, to your point, I think we often think of when we have these conversations. It's just like the stereotype of like, oh, we're talking towards women. No, 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 I also want you to feel listened to. You should also feel trusted. And I think even the end, when you mentioned friendships, I also think a lot of times people think this is just towards intimate partnerships and intimate partnership violence. And I think across the board, people do not realize that they are being abused in friendships. Like, like, truly and honestly don't think, and this is coming as someone who's had to have like a big friendship breakup, because I realized like, yeah, everyone else around me is like, this person is not your friend. Every time you talk to them, you feel bad about yourself. And if you were to take the word friend out and just look at what this person was doing, someone would probably think like, oh my gosh, you're in an abusive relationship with a partner. And it's like, no, this is a friend. And I think that that is so important to also recognize that everything we said here today, whether you're in your job or a friendship, it goes across all, all those sectors, because I do think there's so much that happens in friendships that people sometimes don't realize they can stop as well. Or, and I say you can stop as in, your friend shouldn't be talking behind your back, or you should not just be living in the state of chaos and friend breakup this week, back together. That's not okay either. Friendships deserve to be peaceful.
And it
That's
transcends
amazing.
time, right? So I think a lot of people too, sorry, I think a lot of people too are like, well, but I've been friends with this person for 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We all said okay. I love it.
Okay. Like, I have friends that I've known for months that are closer to me than some of the friends that I've known since college. But
Yeah.
Well,
I
let's name them.
feel, yeah, what?
Well, let's name them. Let's put it. No, I'm
Um,
just.
should I put people on blast? No.
No, no,
He
no,
said,
no.
But yeah,
everybody
it's
say the
like,
name at the
but
same
you
time.
but you have this like idea that like, oh, but I've known this person for so long. And we do it in relationships too, but we've been dating for a year,
There's a
right?
momentum
Like
that
we
we
equate
believe deserves
that.
to be respected.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that
There's
I've
some
put
sort
all
of
these
relationship momentum.
resources yeah, I've put all these resources in it already. I don't wanna just walk away and,
Right, the
waste
time makes you feel like you
time.
have to mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
well,
We got passionate,
obviously,
Stolman.
no, I'm trying to pull this back because obviously the passion that both of you have for this topic is amazing. The fact that you can pour into people and pour into people, and the fact that they leave the room better because they were in that room with you talking about this and leave with skills and a framework of how they see the world that changes the trajectory of their relationships is it is no small thing. Thank you both for being a part of this. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar and watching and sharing it with others. Yes, the question that's on your mind right now is how could I possibly bring either or both of these amazing women to our campus to work with our communities? Why, yes, you can. That's what they would love to be able to do. Quite honestly, that's what fuels them in many ways, the ability to do this kind of work and leave your students in your communities better. And so we'd love to help you bring them to your campus. As I mentioned earlier, we have a whole series of webinars we're bringing out there to support our partners. We know many out there in the higher education world are trying to do more with less. And we at Campus Speak want to support you and want to help you. And so I hope that you will check our social medias of Facebook and the Insta and LinkedIn to see what webinars are coming up. And if we really like you, we probably already email you and you'll see it there too. But again, this is David Stallman here with Campus Speak. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Dr. Lori and Cheyenne, for dropping so many of those bars, the mic drop moments that help people be better. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You.